You are now listening to Talk Loud Radio, sports, nerds, and pop culture.
Deep one for the end zone. Phelan is down there. Oh, he got it! He got it! He got it!
What is going on? All right, guys, welcome to the Armchair Fantasy Show, episode 17. This is going to be our second live episode on Facebook. So we are currently on Facebook right now. If you want to check us out for our next live broadcast, you're listening to this on the podcast, just search for GoingFor2.com on Facebook and follow our fan page. That's GoingFor2.com spelled out. So GoingFor2, DOTCOM. Again, guys, this is Jeff Lambert, of course. I'm your host here. You can follow me on Twitter at JeffLambert77. You can also follow the show at Talk Loud Podcast and the website at GoingFor_2. So, obviously you can check us out at the website, talkloudradio.com, and we're streaming in the GoingFor2 app as well. All right, guys, tonight we're going to have returning guests come on. We're going to talk about some NFL free agents and the impact that they may have on fantasy football, especially for you dynasty guys out there. So we're going to bring in Matt Sandell of GoingFor2.com. Matt, how you doing tonight?
Not too bad, Jeff. Not too bad. Baseball season's right around the corner.
Yep, I know that's your big season.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It started to warm up here in Minneapolis. It was 46 on Sunday, and then boom, 10 inches of snow yesterday. It was awful. It's just unbelievable, the changes in weather here in Minneapolis.
That's pretty crazy.
It makes it tough here in the winter, and it's like March 6th right now. Unbelievable.
Yeah, we just came out of a huge windstorm over here on the East Coast, and trees are down, people without power. My place of business, I work at Home Depot. They actually lost power for 3 days. It was pretty crazy here for a little bit. And then a week before that, when I was on vacation, I had 75-degree weather in the middle of February. So it's pretty crazy here as well.
No doubt.
All right, man, you ready to jump into some of these free agents?
Yeah, let's do it. Quick shout out. It's kind of a sad day in the NFL. Ed Hockley retiring after 28 years of amateur bodybuilding and reffing NFL games.
I missed that.
Probably the most. It's a sad day for sure. He's the most famous ref to ever officiate in the NFL, and he's just. It's going to be sad to not have him around next year.
Agreed. All right, so obviously the free agent officially starts on March 14th. They got that 2-day legal tampering sort of window that starts at March 12th. Today is March 6th, so we're going to look at some of these free agents coming up here pretty soon. We'll start off with some of the big ones right off the bat with the quarterbacks. Probably the biggest piece that needs to fall for this offseason for things to start falling into place is the fate of Kirk Cousins. He's pretty much the highest profile quarterback on the markets. He's basically the rumored to go to 4 different teams that are vying for his services. Your very own Vikings, the Denver Broncos, the Cardinals, and the Jets. From a fantasy perspective, if you're a Cousins dynasty owner, which of those teams do you prefer him to land at?
So yeah, if you own Cousins in a dynasty league, I mean, basically what I'm looking at is the offensive coordinator and basically the weapons around him. You look at the Jets, I mean, he's basically narrowed it down to the Jets and the Vikings, but we can still talk about the Cardinals and Broncos. So yeah, you look at the Jets, they have Safarian Jenkins, who I hope they're going to re-sign. Other than that, though, I mean, Matt Forte just retired. I mean, Robbie Anderson just got a DUI. I mean, I'm not sure what his future holds. I don't think he's going to be a member of the Jets after some of the details of that report came out. So there's not a lot of weapons there for Cousins, and I don't see him going there. I don't like that spot for him, and I think he's too smart to to go to the Jets, no matter how much money they give him. Well, let's take a look at the Broncos too. I mean, I like the Broncos a little more than the Jets. You got Emmanuel Sanders, who I think they're going to bring back, Demaryius Thomas, of course, and hopefully C.J. Anderson can get healthy. That's not a terrible spot for him. That's actually who I thought he was going to go to at the start of this offseason, but it looks like he's basically narrowed it down to Minnesota and New York. The Cardinals, that doesn't really make sense for him to go to Arizona. They're basically going to be rebuilding. Carson Palmer retired. They don't have a quarterback right now. Their defense is still really good, and David Johnson is coming back off that wrist injury. But again, not a lot of weapons there. They're losing John Brown, Jerron Brown, and Larry Fitzgerald's really old. I don't like that spot for him either. I think, honestly, again, trying to be unbiased here, but the most weapons, it's got to be Minnesota. Thielen, 1,000 yards last year, Pro Bowl season for him. Diggs, of course, for the famous 61-yard catch, and just an overall fantasy monster at times. And then you look at the running game. Dalvin Cook's coming back. Hopefully they can re-sign McKinnon, and Kyle Rudolph is one of the top-tier tight ends in this league. He has a ton of weapons in Minnesota. I think, honestly, if you're a dynasty owner, you're rooting for that to happen, for him to go to Minnesota, because that team is, with him at quarterback, it's going to be an extremely high-powered offense.
I agree 100%. I think if you own Cousins in Dynasty, you definitely want him to go to the Vikings. I think the Broncos is a bit of an older team. You got Sanders there, and DT are there, of course. C.J. Anderson may not be there this year, depending on how they do with the cap. They may end up cutting him and going younger with the running back position there. But Vikings overall do have the most talent. The only thing I'm concerned about, because I do live here in Washington, D.C., and everyone's kind of seeing what Cousins is going to do, because he's been holding out for the big, long contract, and they kept offering him one, and he just wasn't taking it. So now it's a matter of, is he going to take the situation where he can win now, like the Vikings, or the money where he can go and get that at the Jets? And it's really dependent on what he wants to do. Does he want the money to go to the Jets, or does he want to win now? Which I would think that you'd want to win now, but we've known guys in the past that have gone to situations that aren't necessarily ideal, chasing that money. So I guess we'll see where Cousins is. He seems like a pretty humble guy. He might actually end up in Minnesota, and I think that would be definitely a good fit for him with the weapons he has around him. He had some decent weapons here in Washington as well. Maybe not so much this year with Jordan Reed hurt and the receivers pretty much rolling over completely. But when they had Pierre Garçon and Deshaun Jackson and, a few of those guys, Jordan Reed, when he was healthy, he was a pretty successful quarterback. And I think with the guys you have there in Minnesota, I think he can be even more successful and kind of be that franchise guy that they haven't had really in Minnesota since probably Dante Culpepper, maybe. I don't know, you know Minnesota better than I do, but that's the first one that pops into my head.
Yeah, well, this is a very interesting scenario here, Jeff. It's probably so you take a guy, you look at franchise quarterbacks, Andrew Luck, Russell Wilson, guys like that. When they hit the market, their team re-signs them right away. Mm-hmm. Matthew Stafford gets huge deals, Jerrick Carr. There's no reason for them not to re-sign. They can get the most money with their team that drafted them, and the teams offer them the most money because they want to lock them up and have their franchise guy.
Right.
So the last big name quarterback to really hit the market, like Cousins, like he is a franchise quarterback 100%, yet his team isn't re-signing him. So the last big name quarterback for this to happen to is Peyton Manning in 2012. This is legitimately the biggest free agent on the market since then. So this is a really, really interesting free agent year to kick it off with Cousins. And there's some other big names coming too, in wide receivers and running backs. But Cousins, the ball's in his court. Whatever he wants to do, he can still make $30 million a year and win playing for the Vikings. That's probably the deal he's going to get, is about 31 a year, maybe a 3 or 4 year contract. And yeah, you're right. It's all about the money to him. But this is a very interesting scenario where a franchise quarterback hits the market, because it really never happens, because those guys get re-signed right away because their teams want to hold on to them. So very interesting free agent period. I think he does, from the reports I've been reading. Of course, I'm following it very closely. It sounds like he's coming here to Minnesota. So I'm excited. I'm excited for a lot of reasons, but and we're gonna get into him next. But I feel a little bad for Case Keenum. I feel like he's kind of getting the shaft here. Kind of a middle finger to him. He had a better year than Cousins last year in terms of efficiency, QBR. He had a much better year than Cousins and would take less money to play with us. And yet it looks like the Vikings are set on Cousins. Yes. But yeah, it's a tough situation. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, speaking of Case Keenum, he was my next up on the list here for quarterbacks, and he's getting zero respect. He leads the Vikings to with one game of the Super Bowl. Has a better season than most Viking QBs have had over the past few years. Do NFL teams view him as a starter? Like, is he going to end up somewhere else with starter type money? Or do you think he goes back to being that sort of journeyman quarterback, backing somebody up after the season that he just had?
Well, when I look at all the teams who are quarterback needy right now, it really murkies the water here for the quarterback free agent landscape, because a team like Denver, a team like Arizona, a team like the New York Giants, all of them need quarterbacks, but they also have like top 5, 6, 7 picks in the draft. So that's where the water gets kind of murky. Like, I mean, free agency is about to hit, but yet the draft's coming up.
Right.
So, I mean, it's these GMs they have in place, like Denver may not sign any quarterback and draft one instead. So same with the Giants. I think the Giants are a team who are going to draft instead of sign one, because it just makes sense. Their team's rebuilding. However, they do have a lot of big contracts that they gave out on defense, and they're in a little bit win now mode. So it's all up to the GMs whether they want to draft or sign these guys, because Bridgewater's going to hit the market. Bradford is too. Tyrod Taylor, AJ McCarron's out there too. But I think I basically watched every snap of Case Keenum last year. He was good as a Houston Texan. And then just sort of went to Los Angeles and really struggled there.
Who didn't struggle there under Jeff Fisher?
Yeah, he struggled there, and it's because of their offensive line, and Jeff Fisher's just a terrible offensive mind. And so, he really popped this year, and Pat Shurmur, I'm really, really upset that we lost him to the Giants. He's now their head coach. Keenum and Shurmur just did incredible things together, and the guy had the highest QBR while being pressured in the NFL, and that's a huge stat. So even if he goes to a team with a poor offensive line, the guy just had an incredible season last year, and like we said, he had a better season than Kirk Cousins, and and he's not going to get a Cousins-like deal. He's probably looking at about 18 to 20 million a year, and not 30 million a year like Cousins. So he's definitely a starter in this league, 100%. You see some of the starting quarterbacks that there were this year, like Brian Hoyer and Blaine Gabbert, Blake Bortles. There were some terrible, terrible starters, and he was way better than any of them. So it's got to be Tom Savage. I forgot to throw him in there. He was awful this year.
He lasted a half, didn't he? Basically played 2 quarters, and he was benched.
Oh, yeah. Just right away they went to Deshaun Watson. It was a train wreck. But, yeah, I think Keenum, there's no question he's a starter in this league, and he wants to start somewhere. The teams I'm hearing is Denver, possibly, Arizona maybe, but it looks like, again, it's going to come down to what these teams want to do. Do they want to draft or they want to sign Keenum? A team like Arizona, I mean, they're rebuilding right now. Their team isn't very good. They lost Carson Palmer. They were just a middle of the road team last year. I don't know if they need a guy like Keenum, but it's all up to these GMs. So we'll see what happens. But Keenum definitely is going to get a pretty big contract for the play that he did this year. He was an MVP candidate, believe it or not. He was top 5 MVP candidate this year for sure.
Pretty crazy when you think of the season that he's had last couple of years. No one really saw him, being the guy there in Minnesota. Cousins basically holds the ball in his court as far as where Keenum lands, because wherever Cousins signs, obviously Keenum's not going to go there. All those teams that we mentioned are vying for Kirk Cousins. Now, Cousins kind of can screw everybody by not signing immediately and just kind of sitting out there.
Exactly.
And Case Keenum would sit there, have to wait, because if teams think they can get Kirk Cousins, they're going to wait for Kirk Cousins. So it's kind of the ball's in his court. So as soon as that sort of shoe drops is when I think the quarterbacks start to get signed. I think a big thing was when Jimmy G got signed just a few weeks ago. I think Kirk Cousins camp kind of saw that contract and were like, all right, that's the market. That's what we're looking for. Kirk Cousins is a more established quarterback. He probably should get more than Jimmy G. So the fact that he got that big contract, I think, is going to kind of set the precedence for the whole market for the quarterbacks.
Absolutely. And then Aaron Rodgers will get a new deal because of the Cousins signing, and a bunch of literally is Kirk Cousins is the first domino that falls into all of free agency, and teams are going to look at, a team like the Vikings. They really are dead set on him as their quarterback, and they want to pay him $30 million. Like, the way teams have won the Super Bowl in years past, including this year, you look at a team like the Seahawks, 2013 Seahawks, this year's Philadelphia Eagles, teams whose quarterbacks, even the LA Rams, to add another one with Jared Goff, teams whose quarterbacks make very little money and are still good. Wentz, Goff, Russell Wilson made less than the long snapper his rookie year, and they won the Super Bowl in his second year. Like, it's either you have Tom Brady, who takes a small contract because he makes more in advertisements and whatnot, or you have a very good quarterback at a very young age. He's your franchise guy, and he only makes like $4 to $5 million, like Wentz and Goff are making right now. So then you can upgrade at offensive line and defensive positions. So if the Vikings sign Cousins to a near $100 million contract, it's gonna hurt other positions, and they're not going to be able to improve in other ways. So it's a tough call, because like a lot of people here in Minnesota are saying Keenum is way cheaper and was better than Cousins last year. And I know Cousins seems like the safer option for the long term. Who knows if that was just a fluke year from Keenum last year, but Keenum, Kirk Cousins is really going to handicap the Vikings salary cap wise. They're not going to be able to sign other big free agents, and guys just aren't going to want to come there because they can't pay him the max,
Exactly. A perfect example of that is Joe Flacco a few years ago. He wins the big game, took a bet on himself, gets this humongous contract, and they haven't been good since because they can't afford to pay anybody because he has that huge contract.
That honestly might have been the worst contract in maybe sports history. No, the A-Rod contract was really bad, but that was definitely up there as one of the worst contracts in football history. Joe Flacco, he is another one. Like, Case Keenum is way better than Joe Flacco, and Joe Flacco makes $120 million. Yep. Joe Flacco was awful this year. He was terrible.
Yep.
A team like that, Ravens, they're handicaps. They've done well throughout the draft and picking up undrafted free agents and whatnot, and they've been able to stay relevant, kind of. But yeah, a great example, perfect example.
All right, the only other really interesting quarterback on the free agent market, and he's not really because he's any good or that he lit the scoreboard up or anything, but just because he's sort of an unknown. And that's A.J. McCarron. He was actually traded to the Browns in the middle of the season, but because of a little snafu with some paperwork, he actually was not traded, so he ended up staying in Cincinnati. But now he's sort of sued the NFL and somehow I don't even know the situation, but I know he became a free agent somehow, some way. So he hits the market, and do you think there's a market for him? Do you think he's going to be a starter somewhere in this league?
100%. This is like on like the hot take scale. This is like a 6, maybe a 7. But I think AJ McCarron's better than Andy Dalton. I really do. He played excellent in their playoff game, and they nearly snuck out a win in that one playoff game that McCarron started. And when he started, he had a 66% completion percentage. His QBR was around 90. And I know it's a small sample size, but he looked really, really good, man. He was an excellent quarterback for the Bengals. And I was a little surprised. It's Andy Dalton. You paid him a lot of money. I get that. But McCarron's the better quarterback, to be honest. He's way better than Andy Dalton. And his mechanics are kind of trash, and he doesn't look pretty when he's throwing the football. It doesn't look pretty at all. But in my opinion, I think I think McCarron's going to get a pretty big contract. It's going to be something like a Mike Glennon contract of last year, like 15 mil a year, something like 3 years, 45, something like that. I think McCarron's definitely a starter in this league, and he proved it in the small sample size we got a couple years ago in Cincinnati. I think McCarron's really good, actually. I think.
Go ahead.
I think a destination for him. It's just like one of those gut feeling things. Like I just have a gut feeling that he's headed for the Arizona Cardinals for some reason. I don't know why. I just think they're a team that could use. McCarron's not old by any means. He's a relatively young guy. Hasn't been in the league very long, and I think he could definitely be an excellent quarterback to restart that franchise because they're definitely rebuilding right now. I think he could definitely be an Arizona Cardinal in a couple weeks. Yeah,
I agree. I think that's a good fit for him as well. The funny thing was, I listened to the radio the other day, and they were comparing A.J. McCarron and his little short stint as a starter and Jimmy Garoppolo and his short stint as a Patriot as a starter, and how similar their numbers really were. But because it was the Patriots, Garoppolo got all the hype and all the, he could be the next Tom Brady type, hype that they were giving him. And of course, gets traded to the 49ers and et cetera, et cetera. The rest is history. But A.J. McCarron's numbers in those games that he did play were very comparable to Garoppolo's numbers, but yet he's not getting the same sort of pub that Garoppolo did.
Absolutely. And I think it's just basically like the fact that he was getting mentored by Brady, I think. And of course, Garoppolo hasn't lost a game in the NFL that he started.
Yep.
So, I mean,
it's kind of crazy.
You can't really argue with that.
Yep.
You can't really argue with that. And the biggest thing when it comes to Garoppolo, and of course you're a 49ers fan, is that I think it was just like they won what? They were 5-0 or 6. Yeah, they're 5-0 with Garoppolo.
With Garoppolo, yep.
It's just like a culture shakeup. Like I think the players like perk up a little when they hear the news. Hey, we got Jimmy G as our franchise quarterback. They want to play harder for him rather than trying to play with guys like C.J. Beathard and
Brian
Hoyer. I mean, when they got Jimmy G, it was just a whole big culture change for them. Everybody was excited to play. Like, okay, we got something here, and that's you saw that with Deshaun Watson in Houston too. It's literally, as cheesy as it sounds, it's literally them trying to build a culture. Agreed.
I think A.J. McCarron in Arizona sounds really good, especially if you're a DJ owner. He should be back healthy. I've heard everything I've heard. He's back to 100% now. Because if they don't have a quarterback that can give any kind of threat down the field, he may have a tough season. But if A.J. McCarron is anything that we saw that, those few games that he did play, I think he can step right in there and at least have the threat to move the ball down the field, giving Johnson some room to run, obviously catch out of the backfield as well, and just be that fantasy beast that he's always been. So, yeah, definitely if McCarron goes to the Arizona Cardinals, I think they'll be in good shape. Some of the other
For
QBs...
Sure. They got to...
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to jump into the next QBs, but go ahead.
I was just going to say they need to surround McCarron with some weapons, though. That offense in Arizona was really, really bland last year. It was just basically Larry all day. They didn't. I can't even name their number 2 receiver on that side of the ball. They got Floyd. Floyd got cut several last year, and he's now in the Vikings. But they need to surround him with some weapons there in Arizona.
I think their number 2 receiver was just named Hamstring because literally all the receivers were out with hamstring injuries. So, it was Jerron Brown was out for a while. John Brown was out for a while. They had JJ, I forget his last name, something. I forget. I had him on my
Nelson.
Yes, JJ Nelson. They had him as number 2 for a while. It was insane. It was like a corral of just receivers just filling the number 2 spot. All right. The only other quarterbacks that are on this list here are like Jay Cutler. You mentioned Sam Bradford, Teddy Bridgewater. And then a few possible cap casualties would be Andy Dalton may get cut with that big contract. Tyrod Taylor could possibly hit the free agent market as well if he gets cut. Are any of these guys, from a fantasy standpoint, any of them interest you in any sort of landing spot in the NFL?
I honestly, I'm trying to be as honest as I can. I want to spice things up and talk about some of these guys. Nothing here really intrigues me at all. Honestly, Jay Cutler was awful last year. That team got shut out by the Saints defense before the Saints defense got good. Sam Bradford, a buddy, when we brought him back in week 5 against the Bears, a buddy texted me, he goes, I'm not sure if you watched that game. It was a Monday Night Football game, and
Probably.
It was the halftime score was 3-2. It was awful. And my buddy texted me, he goes, Sam Bradford looks like an 80-year-old man in the pocket. He looks so slow, and just like was definitely that injury was still hurting him. And so I don't really know what to think of Bradford. He'd probably be the one intriguing guy, because in the one game he played against the Saints this year, he had an almost perfect QBR in that game. So Bradford, I don't know if he's really even a starter. I mean, I could see him on a team like maybe like the Bills or something like that. It's tough, but all those other guys you mentioned, I mean, Bridgewater, again, coming off a terrible, terrible injury. The guy almost lost his leg. If they didn't, they legitimately in the injury report said it almost had to be amputated because of how bad it was. It punctured an artery. He almost lost his leg. So again, I'm not sure what to think about him. Other teams are thinking the same thing. Well, what Teddy Bridgewater are we going to get? Are we going to get the one that led him to the playoffs, or are we going to get, just a guy who we haven't really seen a lot of and who's just trying to get back in the swing of things? Tyrod would be kind of an interesting one if the Jaguars didn't re-sign Bortles. I think Tyrod would be an interesting fit there. But, none of those guys, honestly, from a fantasy perspective, really piqued my interest. I think Jay Cutler, who had retired last year, will probably just retire again. None of those guys are really – I really don't see a lot of fantasy value from a dynasty perspective in any of those guys.
I agree. The only one I'd be interested in would be Tyrod Taylor, just because of his running ability. If he went to the right situation that was going to take advantage of his situation, his strengths, and that's running the ball, then maybe. But I don't think I'm going to take a chance on him. If he's out there on a waiver wire, I'm not going to add him unless he gets to some really good situation. But I can see him going somewhere and being a backup somewhere.
Yeah, for sure. And again, it's all going to depend on the draft. There's 5, what a lot of people think, almost 6 quarterbacks that could be drafted in the first round. So, I mean, teams like we mentioned, the Giants, the Cardinals, the Browns, they're not going to shell out this big money when, like we said, the key to winning in the NFL right now to have Super Bowl chances is get your quarterback on a really good contract. If he's like, again, Goff, Wentz, Wilson, all of them made virtually nothing against the cap, so they were able to bolster their defenses. And especially Seattle, they got Michael Bennett and Cam Chancellor, and all those guys got to sign him to big contracts. So, yeah, I don't think any of those guys are going to be I don't know what team is going to go out there and have Sam Bradford or Teddy Bridgewater as their starter next year. I just really don't see it when the QB class in this draft is one of the best in history, is from the reports I'm getting. So it's going to be interesting because a lot of those guys who were starting last year are going to just be backups basically, or hold out until someone gets injured next year. Agreed.
All right, let's go ahead and jump into running backs really quick. Took a little bit more time on quarterbacks than I wanted to, but that's okay. Jumping into the running backs, the big news that just kind of dropped today, I mean, it was kind of announced a little bit earlier than this, but today it became official, is the Steelers are going to apply the franchise tag to Le'Veon Bell, who had previously stated that he would not play in the franchise tag for a second consecutive year. Do you see him holding out for a long-term contract, and should you be worried if you're an owner of him in Dynasty?
There's when it comes to all these guys and holding out, wanting a new contract, I get that. But the percentage of guys who actually don't play week 1 of next year is 1% of guys. It seems like all these guys threaten to hold out. Actually, Aaron Donald actually did miss 2 games this year holding out, but then the Rams actually had something and were really good. And so he came back and played 14 of the 16 games. But it very rarely do these guys actually hold out into the season. So I wouldn't be worried if I'm a dynasty owner. I really don't. He said the same thing last year, ended up playing week 1. It doesn't really concern me at all. I'm not. I think Le'Veon Bell will probably. He said he was going to retire if they franchised him.
Yeah,
that's going to happen.
Right.
But the reason, of course, especially from a running back perspective, if a running back gets franchised, we've seen the shelf life of halfbacks in this league is basically like 4 to 5 years.
Yep.
If you're lucky, you get like an Adrian Peterson or like a Mark Ingram, guys who can last 10 to 12 years. But mostly with these young running backs, I mean, their shelf life is just so little and they get hurt so much. And Bell just doesn't want to keep getting one-year contracts because then, of course, he's going to tear an ACL and then they're going to be like, oh, sorry, like he's just going to be a cap casualty again, basically,
Yep.
you know?
Yep, agreed. Yeah, I'm with you on that too. I don't see him holding out into the season. It's just not something that happens very often. I don't see him retiring. Definitely, I can't see him being, oh, here's whatever it is, $28 million, whatever it is that he'd get for a franchise. I don't see him being like, no, I'm just going to retire. Thanks, but no thanks. Matt, you still there?
No doubt. Yeah, for sure.
Hold on 1 second. I think we lost Matt for a few minutes here. I'll just keep filling some air time. I think Matt might be at his job right now trying to do this podcast. In just a minute here, we're going to take... actually, you know what?
God damn it. Sorry about that.
It's all good.
My bad.
I was going to take a commercial break there if you didn't come back soon.
All right, well, sorry about that.
Nope, you're good.
So we were talking about Bell. My bad.
Nope, you're good. We're gonna go ahead and move on to Carlos Hyde now. So Carlos Hyde is another free agent out there. The 49ers last year kind of split carries between him and Breida, and they also still have their rookie from last year that didn't play a single snap in the regular season, Joe Williams. This backfield's kind of murky. Do you think the 49ers move on from Carlos Hyde, or do you think they figure out a way to sign him and keep him in San Francisco?
Yeah, I think that they will move on from Carlos Hyde. My big thing, and I'm a very, very firm believer in this, I like to say I'm like the president of this club, is that you should not, take a running back in the first round of the draft. I don't care who it is. I really don't. And this is a guy coming from a fan of the Vikings who took Adrian Peterson and had an incredible career as the 7th overall pick. But I'm a firm believer that you do not pay up for running back. You do not pay a running back a large amount of money, and you do not draft a running back in the first round of the draft. And when Carlos Hyde is a very good back, especially for fantasy owners, and he can pass catch, he can run. He destroyed my Vikings on Monday Night Football several years ago.
Yeah.
Just torched the Vikings defense. He's a really good back, but he's going to demand a big contract. And I actually like Breida a lot. I think he can be really good. And I just want to list. I wrote this down on the back of my parking ticket. This is a list of very fantasy relevant and very good running backs and what round they were drafted in. Okay, you ready, Jeff?
Ready. Go ahead.
All right. Kareem Hunt, late 3rd round, 2 picks away from the 4th round. Jordan Howard, 5th round. C.J. Anderson, undrafted. Alvin Kamara, 3rd round. Tariq Cohen, 3rd round. Ty Montgomery, drafted as a wide receiver, but in the 5th round, averaged 5.4 yards per carry a couple years ago. Kenyon Drake, 3rd round. Lamar Miller, 4th round. Devontae Freeman, 4th round. James White, 4th round. Deion Lewis, 5th round. Jay Ajayi, 5th round. Latavius Murray, 6th round, led the AFC in rushing several years ago with the Raiders. Alex Collins had a big year for the Ravens last year, 5th round. And then Arian Foster, undrafted. To have a running back, just like the way the position is played, there's just so much. And you look at a guy like Todd Gurley. 2 years ago, did not have a single game with 100 yards in one game. In 16 games that he played under Jeff Fisher, 0 100-yard games. This year, Offensive Player of the Year. Better offensive line and great coaching. It's the running back position is just so dependent on your offensive line. Just look at the Cowboys drafted Zeke 4th overall, and a lot of people are, great pick. But, Darren McFadden ran for 1,100 yards behind that O-line as a 30-year-old. Like Zeke Elliott, okay, he led the league in rushing his rookie year. That's great. if they had taken a guy like Jalen Ramsey with the 4th overall pick, they might have been playing for the Super Bowl. There are just too many instances of just running backs, the saturation and just like the amount of good backs there are in this league. You can get one all the time, especially in fantasy, off the waiver wire. Get a guy like Alex Collins, Kenyon Drake, Jerrick McKinnon, guys like that. Just the saturation of the position. You look at quarterback or tight end, Rob Gronkowski, Travis Kelce, Jimmy Graham, and then it really takes a dive and goes to like
Zach Ertz. Don't forget Zach Ertz.
Zach Ertz, Tyler Eifert, guys like that. Quarterback, the best quarterback in the league, Tom Brady. The worst quarterback, Brock Osweiler in terms of starters. Look at running back, best running back in football, Todd Gurley. The worst running back is probably a guy like, Jerrick McKinnon when he was starting for us, or like Kenyon Drake. And those guys are still really good backs. And so just do not, if your team pays Carlos Hyde, I'd be really bummed if I were you. Just do not pay him. The backs are so replaceable. They get hurt all the time. And it's all about your offensive line. That's literally all it is when it comes to running back success. Jay Ajayi, another great case study. He was averaging 3.4 yards per carry with the Dolphins, got traded to the Eagles, and although it was a small sample size, bumped that 3.4 all the way up to 5.8 yards per carry behind the best offensive line in football. So I'm just not a proponent of paying for running backs or drafting them in the first round. What's your take on that?
No, I agree 100% actually, because I've watched every snap of the 49ers this past season, and if you didn't look at the number on the back of the jersey, you couldn't tell the difference between Breida and Carlos Hyde. I mean, they look almost very similar. They're similar in stature. They run similar. They both, average about the same amount of yards per carry. They were basically the same player. So, yeah, I'm not really big on signing Carlos Hyde to a big contract. And going back to their 4th-round pick, Joe Williams, I watched him play in a couple of the preseason games before he got injured. And of course, they went through Hyde. They played Breida a little bit. Joe Williams came in the 3rd or 4th quarter, so he's playing against, some of the backups. But he looked faster and more explosive than the other two combined. I mean, he was like jumping off the screen how fast he was. And I was like, this guy's going to be legit. Of course, he goes and gets hurt, misses the whole season, But I think if he can get back in there, get healthy, get that explosiveness back in there, I think he's going to be the next running back that we're going to have is going to be pretty good. I think we got a pretty good tandem there with Breida and Joe Williams, and I don't want to pay up for Hyde if I have to.
Absolutely. And just, again, there's just so many, the difference between the best starting running back and the worst starting running back is very, very small. Well, unlike, again, like the example I used, worst starting quarterback, Brock Osweiler versus Tom Brady, is massive, massive difference. And just the outcome of your team is going to be so ridiculously different than whether you have a good or bad running back. One last case study of that, Leonard Fournette, great running back. People think of him as a top 5 back. He only averaged 3.88 yards per carry this year. And when he played, the Jaguars were 7-6. And I know the sample size is kind of small, but when he didn't play, they were 3-0. So, I mean, having a good back is not essential to win in the 2018 NFL.
The ironic thing there with your analogy with the best quarterback, worst quarterback, and then of course best running back, worst running back, is it's the exact opposite in fantasy. You know what I mean? Like quarterbacks, people usually wait to get their quarterback because the difference between the top quarterback and the 10th, 11th, 12th quarterback isn't that great. Whereas in running backs, you got the top 4 or 5 guys, and then it just kind of falls off a cliff. So it's just kind of funny how that fantasy sort of to reality is exactly the opposite in the two.
No doubt.
Hold on. We got a question from Facebook. Let's see. Dion Lewis seems to have good upside. If he goes to a good team with the offensive line, what kind of upside do you think he has? What do you think of Dion Lewis if he's not with the Patriots next year?
Dion Lewis is a very, very explosive back, and just the way he runs, I love watching Dion Lewis play. He's so quick off the line, and that's a great point. I think a team, some rumors that I'm hearing are the Jets are interested in him. The Bengals are also very interested in him. And he's a great, excellent back. However, you never know what the Patriots office is going to do. Because if I was them, I think I would keep Dion Lewis. I know he's going to demand a lot of money, but I think Dion Lewis is honestly a top top 10 back, in my opinion. I think, I don't know. It depends on the team that he goes to. And again, I got to look at their offensive line, because if it was like the Jets, it's like, okay. But Deion Lewis just seems like one of those Patriots lifers to me. He's been a huge part of those Super Bowl winning teams. I'd like to see him stay with the Patriots, but it depends all on the offensive line.
Agreed. And Deion Lewis is one of those guys too that, he catches balls at the backfield and he gives you some value there as well. He can play in the passing game, which is sort of the big thing now with the NFL is running backs catching passes up the backfield, not just catching passes in the flat, but actually running routes and have a route tree where they're actually out in the slot running routes and such like that. So he's one of those guys that are very versatile. So yeah, I kind of like him going anywhere really.
PPR monster.
Definitely. A couple other guys that are out there that are free agents that are sort of cap casualties. They were both cut just recently. Is the Panthers, former Panther Jonathan Stewart, and former Buck Doug Martin. Are either of these guys interesting if they land in a good situation in fantasy, or do you think their time is up?
Absolutely not. Neither of these guys. I'm not taking a flyer on either of these guys. Jonathan Stewart legitimately looked like he shouldn't have been in the league last year. I caught quite a few Panthers games. He just looked terrible last year, and that team just could not run the ball. I think his yards per carry was like 3.4, 3.5, something like that. He was really bad last year, and I think he's been in the league for a decade at least. So I think his clock is almost up here. And Doug Martin has like a drug problem. Like he's been out on and off the Tampa Bay Bucks roster. I don't know. When they start him, I'm like, wasn't he just suspended? Like, and then he's out for a couple games. It's like, yeah, I guess he was. I don't know what to think of Doug Martin. At one time, he was one of the best backs in the league. I think if I had to pick, it'd be Martin over Stewart, but I don't. Again, the position is so saturated. If I'm a team, I'd much rather give a contract to Jerrick McKinnon or like a Damian Williams rather than pay Doug Martin, who possibly has a drug problem and keeps getting suspended.
Yeah, agreed. I think as an owner of Christian McCaffrey, I was happy to see Stewart go because I don't know how many touchdowns he vultured last year, but it was very frustrating for them to use McCaffrey all the way down in the passing game, in the running game, get down to the 2-yard line, they give it to Jonathan Stewart, he gets a touchdown. He used to piss me off, so I'm glad that he's gone, and now I got McCaffrey pretty much as the running back there. I think they're going to try to get Cameron Artis Payne. It's a hard name to say. I think he's the sort of the next in line for that Stewart role, but I like McCaffrey there much more than I did last season with Jonathan Stewart stealing touchdowns. We got another question here from another question here from Facebook. Kind of going off topic here, but talking about the draft. Who's your favorite running back coming out of the draft that's not named Barkley?
Interesting question. Of course, again, Barkley had just such an incredible combine that the Browns are considering him with the top overall pick. I can't believe that. I can't believe that news. Again, I'm all about the running back. Do not draft a running back in the first round. You just talked about McCaffrey. What a terrible pick with the 8th overall pick by the Panthers. McCaffrey averaged like 3.2 yards per carry last year. Was not very fantasy relevant.
He was a PPR monster, though. He was a PPR monster.
Okay, great. 10 catches for like 56 yards. Like that doesn't, whatever.
That's 15 points, man. 15 points. I take it all day.
All right, I get you. But for real, 8th overall pick, they missed out on guys like Marshawn Lattimore. Heck, you could have got Kamara 3 rounds later. Anyway, my favorite running backs, I'd probably say Chubb from the Georgia Bulldogs, or I cannot pronounce his name, but the LSU kid,
Geis, whatever that is. Yeah,
I think he can be special for sure. I really liked him at LSU too. Out of the two of those, I'd probably go Geis. I think he's going to be a stud in this league. But this is a very, very, very deep running back draft too. Just all over the board on offense. Very deep draft for offensive players this year. Agreed.
I think we had a few weeks ago, I think I told you we had Ryan Searfuss on from the Fantasy Football Connect Facebook group, and he's a sort of an expert on the dynasty type rookies and everything. He came on and said that the position that's the deepest this year is running back. So, which makes me happy because I had the 6th pick in my dynasty draft, and I need a running back. So hopefully one of those guys falls to me. I doubt seriously I'll get Barkley, but I'll take Chubb or Geis for sure at the 6th pick.
Oh, for sure, absolutely.
All right, a couple other guys that I want to just mention real quick, and we'll talk about them briefly. That are going to be free agents. We got Isaiah Crowell, who I know Gerson, who comes on the podcast quite often. He's actually one of the watchers right now on Facebook Live. He was a big proponent of him last year. Had a bit of a down season, but he still has some talent left. You mentioned McKinnon. He's going to be out there. Damian Williams, Jeremy Hill, LeGarrette Blount. Are any of these backs interesting if they land in the right positions?
The only one from the list that you gave is probably McKinnon. McKinnon was an excellent pass catcher and runner for the Vikes last year after Cook went down. He had 1,000 yards from scrimmage and was just excellent in the passing game. He averaged, I think, like almost 9 yards per catch. McKinnon is really the only guy. I haven't seen a lot of Damian Williams, but what I have seen I really like. But I think he's more of like a third and 1, 3rd and 2 goal line back more than anything. I don't know why teams keep giving up on LeGarrette Blount. LeGarrette Blount is good. Like, he's won the last 2 Super Bowls?
Yep.
Like, LeGarrette Blount is a good back. I don't understand why teams. He's getting up there in age, I understand, but the way he runs the football, he doesn't need to be fast. He just needs to be big.
Yep.
And he's going to keep eating. So Blount I like. I'm curious to see where he ends up. But yeah, those are a couple guys I like. Jeremy Hill. Wow, he had 1,000-yard season his rookie year. I haven't heard anything from him since at all.
Yep, it's
I don't know what to think about Jeremy Hill. I'd like to see him rejuvenate his career a little bit, but he missed so many opportunities. I don't really know what happened there in Cincinnati.
Agreed.
But yeah, I think out of all those guys, McKinnon is really the back to watch. He's just an excellent pass catching back, and you can use him in the passing game a lot in the slot and stuff like that. He was excellent for the Vikings this year. Definitely.
And just before we go to the break, I wanted to talk about a few possible cap casualties as far as running backs go. I mentioned earlier we got C.J. Anderson from the Broncos could possibly be cut. DeMarco Murray might be cut. They're ready to move into the Derrick Henry era when they're in Tennessee. Lamar Miller possibly cut in Houston. Mike Gillislee and the aforementioned Latavius Murray. Let's just assume that every one of these guys gets cut. From a fantasy perspective, which guy do you want from a dynasty perspective?
Out of all those guys, that's a good question. Honestly, the best pure running back out of that group is probably Gillislee, to be honest. And he got on Belichick's bad side last year, but he was really good for the Bills, and he was really good last year when he played. And he was legitimately on like I forget what do they call that, Jeff? It's like the coach's decision did not dress list or whatever.
Oh,
he was
right,
on that
right.
For like 10 weeks.
Yep.
I don't know what happened, but he was really good for the Patriots. And he's just like a very efficient runner with the football. Very good yards per carry all the time. DeMarco Murray really, really struggled last year. I don't know what happened there. He's getting up there in terms of age, and he's had a couple of big injuries. So yeah, out of all those guys, honestly, I think Gillislee, but I just don't know if he's going to be in the right
situation,
right system. But
yep.
Murray was bad last year. C.J. Anderson is always injured. Out of all those guys, I'd probably just bet on Gillislee if you're looking for one to snag in Dynasty.
Agreed. I think he has the most upside there. I think the rest of those guys are sort of on the downturn. I think Lamar Miller should be in his prime, but he just can't seem to get it all together where he can be that back that they thought they had when they first got him from Miami. But yeah, Gillislee I think is the one I would want as well if I'm in Dynasty. All right, we'll take a quick break right here, Matt, and then when we come back, we'll talk some wide receivers.
Sounds good.
Do you need advice for your fantasy football team? How about your DraftKings or FanDuel lineup? GoingFor2.com has you covered. GoingFor2.com has exclusive content from some of the best fantasy writers in the industry, whose credentials include Bleacher Report, Fantasy Pros, and Fantasy Life. From advice columns to player ranks, GoingFor2.com has it all. Sign up for our newsletter to have all of our content sent to your inbox. Start winning today. Visit GoingFor2.com because no one remembers the extra point.
Today's show was brought to you by Daily Fantasy Nerd. They have everything you need to build better lineups. You can analyze stats, view up-to-the-minute Vegas lines, check player game logs, import and manage your own projections, build optimal lineups, and a bankroll tracker. To get started for free, visit goingfor2.com/dailyfantasynerd. That's goingfor2.com/dailyfantasynerd. Start winning today.
Regulators. You regulate any stealing of his property. We're damn good, too. But you can't be any geek off the street. Gotta be handy with the steel, if you know what I mean. Earn your keep.
Regulators! Mount up. It was a clear black night, a clear white moon.
All right, guys, welcome back. Again, we are here with Matt Sandell of GoingFor2.com. We are talking NFL free agents. Free agency period starts March 14th officially. We've kind of talked about the quarterbacks and running backs, and now we'll touch on the wide receivers. And the first big name, Matt, that jumps out to me is Allen Robinson. People kind of forgot about him because he missed all of last season, got hurt in the preseason. Actually, I think he got hurt in week 1 and then didn't return to for the rest of the season. Assuming he's healthy, how do you think he'll be sought after, and what do you do if you're a dynasty owner? Are you trying to hold on to him? Are you trying to move him? What are you doing with Allen Robinson?
Of course, Jeff, it always comes to who's playing quarterback for the team that he goes to. And of course, that's going to be a big decision for him, especially with so many teams who have question marks at quarterback. Like, he's going to probably hold out until the draft, I think, to see what teams, unless he really knows who he wants to go to, who has an established quarterback right now. But he's definitely, behind Cousins, probably the biggest name on the free agent market. He was excellent several years ago with Blake Bortles at quarterback. I think he's very, very talented. A couple teams that I could see him going to are maybe the Panthers are definitely wide receiver needy. That would be an interesting spot for him for sure. With him and Funchess there. Another team, we mentioned him several times already, the Cardinals, they need a second receiver over there. Him and Fitz, that'd be a very exciting combo over there. But yeah, I depending on where he goes, it's all going to depend on the quarterback and offensive line, of course. I definitely think he's probably going to switch leagues and go to the NFC. I think there are a lot of teams in the NFC who need wideouts. So we'll see what happens. He's definitely one of the more interesting free agents that is on the market.
For sure. You think there's any chance he signs back with Jacksonville?
Well, it doesn't sound like Jacksonville really wants him back necessarily. I saw a report that they're going with Marquise Lee as their number one wideout for now, and basically sending Robinson to the wayside because he is coming off an ACL tear. That is a thing that teams are going to want to look at, especially as a wide receiver. He's not like a quarterback or anything like that, where it's just a pretty simple to overcome. So, yeah, Allen Robinson, it's going to be very interesting to see where he ends up, because I think he's a guy who sort of unlocks an offense, a guy like Martavius Bryant or Stephon Diggs, a guy who just makes everybody around him better, and you really have to pay attention to him on that side of the ball and plan for him. And it's going to be interesting to see what he can do with an actual quarterback, not to just throw shade at Blake Bortles, but it would be very interesting to see if he went to a team like the Packers or something like that.
Oh, that'd be beautiful. That would be, because I think Nelson might be on his way out of there.
If you own him.
I do. I do own him, actually, so definitely. So I would love to see Robinson go somewhere else. I think he struggled a little bit the year before with Blake Bortles. The year before that, he was a beast. He had like 14 touchdowns. So I think he's definitely capable of being a beast. Blake Bortles' sort of inconsistencies as a quarterback kind of hurt him the season before that. And, of course, last year he was injured the whole season. So I would love to see him as an owner go somewhere else and get a better quarterback for sure. Another guy on this list is sort of a big name that, he has those seasons where he's constantly in and out of the lineup. He's a little bit injured. But when he's on the field, he's one of the most exciting people on the field, and that's Sammy Watkins of the LA Rams. He didn't really get into a rhythm last year with Jared Goff. They had a few receivers last year that sort of overshadowed Watkins, but he hits the market this year. Do you think there's any chance that the Rams re-sign him? And if they don't re-sign him, where do you think he ends up?
Yeah, this is definitely one of the more interesting free agents on the market in terms of that the Rams have said that they do want to sign him. They did not franchise him, though. They franchised Joyner instead. And I don't know what was up last year. Like, they gave up a pick for him, and I thought he would just be, considering that the Rams went from the worst offense in the league to the number one ranked offense last year. Sammy Watkins wasn't a part of it at all.
Right.
Robert Woods was the number one there, which is really, really strange. Sammy Watkins, again, did not. He had a couple of nice deep balls and made a couple connections for touchdowns with Goff, but yeah, just not consistent with him. I really don't know what was up with that. I'd like to see him stay with the Rams. I think he can be good there, and I think he's just an extremely talented wideout. One of just the most purely talented guys in the league. He just has some, I don't know, man. He just has some character issues, and that's why Buffalo wanted to get rid of him. They didn't want him on their cap for next year, so they tried to get a pick out of him. I don't know. I haven't given Sammy Watkins much thought. I think he's just probably going to re-sign with the Rams. I mean, they'll be able to pay him since Goff doesn't make that much, and they won last year. They were a very good squad last year. So I think he probably sticks with the Rams. Some other teams, like we mentioned, the Packers, maybe, who knows? The Cardinals, guys, teams like that, he could slide to, but we'll see. I think he'll probably stay in LA.
Agreed. All right, we have a few more topics that I want to get to, but before we do that, I wanted to get your thoughts on Jarvis Landry. Of course, he's not a free agent, but he did ask for a trade. It's pretty much going to be guaranteed that he's not going to be in Miami this year. If you own Jarvis Landry, what's the situation that's most ideal for him to be traded to? Where would you want him to go?
A couple teams that pique my interest a little bit. The Bears would be an interesting spot for Landry, just because for some reason Trubisky just does not have a great arm, and he needs a number one wide out there. The wide receivers that the Bears had last year were terrible. The worst I've seen in years to have. The Kendall Wright, it was like their number one there. Yeah. I don't know why that was. I know Cam terrible. Meredith did get hurt, but even Cam Meredith isn't a number one. He's like a great number three receiver on a team like the Vikings or a team like the Packers. He's not a number one. Just the weapons that they put around Trubisky were terrible. So I think you'd want to see him go to the Bears. I think he can get a ton of receptions in Chicago there with checkdowns with Trubisky, who doesn't like to air it out very much. A nice little security blanket. Another team, maybe the Titans, would be an interesting spot for him, playing with Mariota, having Corey Davis on one side, Landry on the other. I think one of those two teams is gonna get him. He basically will not be in Miami, and Miami's in a very weird spot. Like, do they try and win now? Like, they have Ryan Tannehill under a big contract, but they aren't very good. Like, they have Sue. It's an interesting spot for Miami too. But I think he'll either end up in Chicago or Tennessee. I'm not 100% sure which, but either of those spots would be great for him. So if you're Landry, or if you're a Landry owner, definitely hold on to him. I think he could have a big year next year. Agreed.
I think he's one of those guys that no matter where he goes, he's that sort of blanket, that security blanket for the quarterback, because he runs those little short routes, and he's sort of that check down guy. So I think in PPR leagues, he's definitely valuable. The rest of these receivers,
he's a PPR monster.
Yeah, he's definitely a PPR monster. I think at one point he had some crazy streak of like 5 receptions for like 50 or 60 yards that it was going on forever that he had, just because he is that sort of PPR kind of guy. But the rest of these receivers that are on this free agents list aren't they're kind of middle of the road guys. We got guys like John Brown, who can't stay healthy. We got Paul Richardson, who was in Seattle, that had some flashes there. Jerron Brown, who has some injury history as well. Danny Amendola, Marcus Lee. We got Dante Moncrief, Jordan Matthews, Terrell Pryor, and Eric Decker. That's a lot of names there, but are any of them worth owning in Dynasty right now?
Yeah, I think there are a couple that stick out to me. One, and I'm not sure if you, I'm sure you're in like 4 or 5 different leagues. You probably owned them in one league. I don't know what the hell was up with the Kirk Cousins doesn't like throwing the Terrell Pryor thing last year. Like, what was up with that? Terrell Pryor had a huge year, monster year for the Browns, who had Cody Kessler as quarterback, and you think he's going to have a huge year with Kirk Cousins, and then things just I don't know if the chemistry was off or what was up, but I don't know why he had such a bad year last year. He didn't have one single fantasy viable game last year. I just don't. He wasn't hurt. Just Cousins never looked his way, and I thought he was going to be a big part of that offense. Just never popped. So I hope he gets in a better situation this year. I'd really like to see what he can do. But he's getting up there in age. He's been in the league for a while. So he really needs to make a name for himself like right now. I can't think of any teams off the top of my head who could use a guy like him. But
rumor is he may go back to the Browns.
Situation. Is that right?
Yeah, the rumor is he may go back to the Browns where he was successful before. So who knows?
Yeah. That's if that happened, I'd be really, really ecstatic for him for sure. I want to see Terrell Pryor do great because he's just to be so athletic that you're able to play, just pick up a new position and have 1,000 yards, like just ridiculous. I'm rooting for Terrell Pryor. I really hope he gets into a good situation.
And not just a new position. I mean, this guy played quarterback, and now he's playing receiver.
Exactly.
It's different to go from a running back to a receiver to a running back, but to go from quarterback to a receiver, that's like completely different situation. It's just unheard of.
One of the most interesting stories and intriguing subplots of NFL seasons in recent years. He just the success he had just picked it up one day, just 1,000-yard receiver, like incredible. So I want to see Pryor be good again. It was one of the first names you listed off was another interesting one for me. Can you list off the first couple?
Yeah, John Brown, Paul Richardson, Jerron Brown, Danny Amendola, Marcus Lee.
Yep, Paul Richardson is another one who I've talked about on prior podcasts how Mariota, for some reason, doesn't give a lot of love to his receivers. Like, you just never own Titans wide receivers if you play fantasy because he always just does checkdowns to Murray or hits Delaney Walker. He really doesn't use his wide receivers. That's why people who had Eric Decker last year should not have been shocked that Eric Decker was not fantasy relevant last year. And I think Paul Richardson gets a little bit of that from Russell Wilson. I mean, we saw flashes of Paul Richardson being really, really good last year. He was extremely explosive. He's a big kid. I really liked Paul Richardson last year. And Russell Wilson, again, like I said, the same thing with Mariota. He doesn't really utilize receivers that much for some reason. He really just likes Baldwin and just sort of mixes in the other guys. One guy will have a big game. Lockett will have a big game one week, and then Paul Richardson will have one. Or Jimmy Graham will have one, or he'll do checkdowns. Russell Wilson likes to spread it out a lot, and so Paul Richardson, I think, could be not one of the better ones in the league, but I think he's a number one receiver somewhere. I really do. Maybe a team like we mentioned, the Bears, or maybe it would be interesting to see him on a team like like the Cardinals, like I've said, or heck, even the 49ers. That'd be an interesting spot for him.
Definitely. We can use some more receivers for sure.
Yeah, I think Paul Richardson is really good, and just I don't think he got a ton of love from Russell Wilson last year.
Agreed. All right, we got a few cap casualties here for the receivers here, and it's kind of if you had these guys, let's put it this way, if you had these guys 5 years ago on your fantasy roster, you were probably in really good shape. But unfortunately, they're kind of winding down in their career. So we've got guys like Dez Bryant, Randall Cobb, Michael Crabtree, Alan Hearns, Jeremy Maclin, Brandon Marshall, Jordy Nelson, Emmanuel Sanders. All these guys are potential cap casualties. If any of these guys hit the market, are you excited as a dynasty owner, or would you want them to stay with the teams that they're at?
All those guys are just so past their primes. One, especially Brandon Marshall, and a subplot that like nobody really talked about last year. I know it drove a fantasy owners nuts, but how terrible, just legitimately terrible, Jordy Nelson was without Aaron Rodgers there.
Yep.
He didn't even have 500 yards this year.
Yep.
He didn't even break 500 yards. And I know Brett Hundley was pretty bad last year, like really bad at times, but come on, he can't even get 500 yards. He must have had like 350 before Rodgers got hurt. I just don't know what happened there. He's getting up there in age. He's lost a step. But I can't see Jordy Nelson not being a Packer. You know what I mean? He's just a Packer in my mind, and always will be. I just can't see him on a team like the Panthers or the 49ers. It'd just be weird. Yeah, that was just an interesting subplot from last year. He just really, really struggled, and that is really going to hurt him come contract time in free agency. Like, oh yeah, what did you do without Aaron Rodgers? Like, no comment.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I think Emmanuel Sanders and Michael Crabtree are very interesting too. Crabtree was still the best receiver in Oakland last year because it was. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Amari Cooper was terrible last year.
Yep.
And Crabtree really had to pick up the slack for Cooper last year. So I think Crabtree is worth keeping. Brandon Marshall he looked done last year. He's really old, and he just looked just did not have a connection with Eli at all, and that team was awful. So yeah, I mean, out of all those cap casualties, Des Bryant is going to be an interesting where he ends up. I don't think he's going to be on the Cowboys, especially with that NSFW Instagram post he had today. I'm not sure if you saw that.
I did not.
You should check it out on Bleacher Report. It was he just went on a rant about the Cowboys, basically. So it looks like he's not going to be there. So yeah, I mean, if you had any of those guys last year besides Crabtree, basically, you probably didn't have a great fantasy year if you had like Brandon Marshall or Jordy Nelson on your team.
Yep. No interest in Randall Cobb. I think he's probably the youngest one on this list here. He's been pretty good before in the slot receiver position. What do you think of Randall Cobb?
Randall Cobb's just one of those guys, like you see it all the time with Brady's wide receivers. Is the reason that Randall Cobb was relevant and was a household name is because he was on the Packers and had Aaron Rodgers throwing him the ball, in my opinion.
Fair enough.
I just think he was pretty good, like in his younger years, excellent kick returner too. But I don't know, man. If he's not on the Packers, I don't really want anything to do with either him or Jordy, to be honest.
Fair enough. All right, we're not going to touch on the tight ends tonight, but I just want to get your thoughts on a close here on the news that the Seahawks are probably not going to re-sign or retain Jimmy Graham. They're going to either let him go or whatever. I'm not sure if he's a free agent or if they're just going to cut him outright. Is there any interest there in Jimmy Graham landing somewhere else, and possibly could he go back to New Orleans?
So I know you're not a big baseball guy, but the Seattle Mariners just signed Ichiro. I'm sure you know what that is, though.
Yep.
They're gonna sign Ichiro apparently, and he was always a Mariner, and he got traded and when they were rebuilding. But in my mind, he's always a Mariner and is probably the best player they've ever had. And the Mariners are going to re-sign him because no other team really wants him. And so having Ichiro back on the Mariners, it's the news we need in 2018 with all the terrible things happening. So I would love to see Jimmy Graham, even as a fan of an NFC team, I would love to see Jimmy Graham go back to the Saints because he had so much success there. And I didn't realize he's 31. I feel like he's like 28 or 29. He's
right.
31 years old, so he's much past his prime. But I would still like to see him go back to New Orleans because I really don't think he was utilized well in Seattle. He never really clicked with Wilson. He got hurt. And it sucks. I really wanted Jimmy Graham, just one of the most athletic freaks in the NFL. Him and Gronk that year, where they were just trying to outduel each other, was so much fun.
Yes,
and he was just one of the best tight ends in football, and he really was underutilized in Seattle, I think.
Agreed 100%. And I know we all know Drew Brees loves him. I think when he got traded to Seattle, I think Brees posted a picture of his baby with wearing a jersey, Jimmy Graham's jersey. So we know he loves Jimmy Graham. So if he's got any say at all, I think Graham might be back in New Orleans if he's got anything to do with it.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, same with the Mariners getting Ichiro back. I'd like to see Jimmy Graham go back to the Saints. It's where he belongs. It's where he had his success, and Seattle just was not a good fit. It seemed like. Definitely.
All right, man, that wraps the show up. Again, we're on Facebook Live. Just search for GoingFor2.com. Just spell out .com. That's where we're going live every Tuesday night. The podcast will be out on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, and TuneIn Radio by tomorrow morning, so you can catch the replay on that. Matt, once again, thank you for coming on. I know you love doing these, and I love having you on. A lot of good insight there, and we're waiting for the free agent season to start here pretty soon. It's going to be exciting.
Yeah, baseball season's just around the corner, and of course, for all the adoring Going for Two fans, I got my sports betting NFL podcast coming this fall. We're going to kick it off in August with some over-under win totals of all NFC and AFC, all 32 teams. It's going to be awesome. Going to have Tim Strobel on for that. Going to have guests every week, prizes, stuff like that. It's going to be awesome. So if you like sports betting, you got to tune in. It's going to be fantastic.
Good stuff, man. Good stuff. Again, thanks for coming on, and we'll talk to you next time.
Have a good one, Jeff.